Hi everyone, I'm Astrid and I'll be presenting a very short presentation on the topic regulation of body temperature. So let's get started. So, what is body temperature? It refers to the temperature of the viscera and the tissues of the body. It is measured either in degree centigrade or degree Fahrenheit. So, the normal body temperature is a 97.9 degree Fahrenheit, which is 36.6 degrees Celsius, to 99 degree Fahrenheit, which is 37.2 degrees Celsius, or 96.8 degree Fahrenheit, which is 36 degrees Celsius, to 99.5 degree Fahrenheit, 37.5 degrees Celsius. The body temperature is controlled by balancing heat production and heat loss. So when the rate of heat production in the body is greater than the rate at which heat is being lost, heat builds up in the body and the body temperature rises. So here in this image, we could see the sites where the body temperature could be measured from. First one is oral, then comes rectal, axillary, groin, and then another one is oral. So, normal body temperature is of two types. The temperature of the deep tissues of the body, which is called core temperature, and it usually remains constant except when a person has a febrile illness. The skin temperature, in contrast to the core temperature, rises and falls with the temperature of the surroundings. So now we'll look at how heat is produced in the body. Look, we eat food and the energy in those food is made available to our body tissues and cells. Now, energy efficiency of the cells is said to be only about 20 to 25 percentage. That is, only 20 to 25 percentage of the energy in the food can be transferred for the synthesis of ATP and its utilization by the functional systems of the cell. So, remainder is evolved as heat. So heat is a byproduct of metabolism. Therefore, if metabolic rate increases, the heat production also increases, and that is determined by some factors. So the first factor would be basal rate of metabolism, which is the number of calories required to keep your body functioning at rest. It is about 65 to 70 calories per hour in a normal 70 kg adult. Next one would be muscle activity. Muscle contractions during physical activity and shivering would increase the metabolism and heat production. Next comes the thermogenic effect of food, and then effect of thyroxine on the cells, cell temperature increase, and then epinephrine, norepinephrine, and sympathetic stimulation on the cells. Now that we know how heat is produced, now let's look at how heat is lost. So the rate at which heat is lost is determined entirely by two factors. That is, how rapidly heat can be conducted from where it is produced in the body core to the skin, and how rapidly heat can then be transferred from the skin to the surroundings. So we look at some important points which we should be knowing. First one would be insulator system of the body. The skin, the subcutaneous tissues, and especially the fat of the subcutaneous tissues act together as a heat insulator for the body. Next one would be blood flow to the skin from the body core. It provides heat transfer. That is, blood vessels are distributed, profusely beneath the skin. And the important point is a venous plexus that is supplied by inflow of blood from the skin capillaries. In most exposed areas of the body, like hands, feet, ears, blood is also supplied to the plexus directly from the small arteries through highly muscular arteriovenous anastomosis. The higher the rate of skin flow, more heat will be conducted from the body core to the skin. Thus, skin is an effective controlled heat radiator system. Next point is control of heat conduction to the skin by the SNS. Heat conduction to the skin by the blood, it is controlled by the degree of vasoconstriction of the arterioles and the arteriovenous anastomosis that supply blood to the venous plexus of the skin. This vasoconstriction is controlled almost entirely by the sympathetic nervous system in response to changes in body core temperature. Next one is increased thyroxine output as a long-term cause of increased heat production. See, if the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area gets cooled, it increases production of the neurosecretory hormone thyrotropin, that is thyrotropin releasing hormone by the hypothalamus. So this hormone is carried by the way of hypothalamic portal veins to the anterior pituitary gland, where it stimulates secretion of thyroid stimulating hormone. Uh, this in turn stimulates increased output of what? Of thyroxine by the thyroid gland. So the increased thyroxine activates uncoupling protein and increases the rate of cellular metabolism throughout the body. So this is another mechanism of chemical thermogenesis. But this does not occur immediately but requires several weeks exposure to cold to make the thyroid gland hypertrophy and reach its new level of thyroxine secretion. Now we'll look at the various methods by which heat is lost. First one would be radiation. It causes heat loss in the form of infrared rays. Most infrared heat rays that radiate from the body have wavelengths of 5 to 20 micrometers, which is 10 to 30 times the wavelengths of light rays. So all objects that are not absolute zero temperature radiate such rays. If the temperature of the body is greater than temperature of the surroundings, a greater quantity of heat is radiated from the body than is radiated to the body. So if a nude person is sitting in a room with normal room temperature, about 60% of total heat loss is by radiation. Next one is conduction. It occurs by direct contact with an object. Only about 3% are lost by direct conduction, but conduction to air, which is loss of heat to air, could be 15% under normal conditions. Conduction of heat from body to air is very much self-limited unless the heated air moves away from the skin. So a new set of unheated air is continually brought in contact with the skin. So this phenomenon is what we call air convection. Now, what is convection? Heat from the skin is first conducted to the air, then carried away by the convection air currents. Then a small amount of convection almost occurs around the body. So, if a nude person is seated in a comfortable room without gross air movement, 15% of his or her total heat loss occurs by conduction to the air, and then by air convection away from the body. Next, how is this heat lost through evaporation? Even when a person is not sweating, water still evaporates from the skin and lungs. This insensible evaporation, it causes continual heat loss at a rate of 16 to 19 calories per hour. This cannot be controlled for purposes of temperature regulation because it results from continual diffusion of water molecules through skin and respiratory surfaces. Under conditions where instead of losing heat, the body gains heat by both radiation and conduction, the only means by which the body can rid itself of heat is by evaporation. So the people who are born with congenital absence of sweat glands can tolerate cold temperature, but they can become severely stressed and die of heat stroke in tropical zones because without the evaporative refrigeration system, they cannot prevent rise in body temperature. Now, clothing reduces conductive and convective heat loss because clothing entraps air next to the skin and decreases flow of convection air currents. But when body is immersed in water, mostly the heat loss occurs by convection because radiation or evaporation cannot occur. Now let's look at sweating. Stimulation of the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area in the brain, either electrically or by excess heat, causes sweating. The nerve impulses from this area that cause sweating are transmitted in the autonomic pathways to the spinal cord and then through sympathetic outflow to the skin. So the sweat glands are innervated by cholinergic nerve fibers that secrete acetylcholine, but that run in the sympathetic nerves along with the adrenergic fibers. So these glands can also be stimulated to some extent by epinephrine or norepinephrine circulating in the blood. Basically, the sweat gland is a tubular structure consisting of two parts: a deep subdermal coil portion that secretes the sweat, and a duct portion that passes outward through the dermis and epidermis of the skin. So the secretory portion secretes the primary or precursor secretion, which is an active secretory product of the epithelial cells lining the coiled portion of the sweat gland. So cholinergic sympathetic nerve fibers ending on or near the glandular cells elicit the secretion. So the composition of this secretion is similar to that of plasma, except that it does not contain plasma proteins. So as this precursor secretion flows through the duct portion of the gland, it is modified by reabsorption of most of the sodium and chloride ions. The degree of this reabsorption depends on the rate of sweating. When the sweat glands are slightly stimulated, the constituents will be more concentrated, and when the glands are highly stimulated by the sympathetic nervous system, the reabsorption will be less. So, therefore, at low rates of sweating, such constituents such as urea, lactic acid, and potassium ions are usually very concentrated. So, now we'll look at the role of hypothalamus. The temperature of the body, it is regulated almost entirely by nervous feedback mechanisms, and almost all of these operate through temperature regulating centers located in the hypothalamus. Again, for these feedback mechanisms to operate, there must also be temperature detectors to determine when body temperature becomes either too high or too low. So the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area contains large numbers of heat sensitive and cold sensitive neurons. So the heat sensitive neurons increase their firing rate in response to increase in temperature. And just like that, cold sensitive neurons increase their firing rate in response to decrease in temperature. When the preoptic area is heated, the skin all over the body immediately breaks out in profuse sweat, whereas the skin blood vessels get dilated and any excess heat production is inhibited in order to cause heat loss. So receptors in other parts of the body also play additional roles. The skin has far more cold receptors than warmth receptors. Therefore, peripheral detection of temperature mainly concerns detecting cool and cold instead of warm temperatures. So deep body temperature receptors are found mainly in the spinal cord, abdominal viscera, and in or around the great veins in the upper abdomen and thorax. Since they are exposed to body core temperature, they function differently than skin receptors. So the peripheral receptors stimulate the area of hypothalamus that is located bilaterally in the posterior hypothalamus, approximately at the level of the mammillary bodies. So the temperature sensory signals from the anterior hypothalamic preoptic area are also transmitted into posterior hypothalamic area. Here the signals from the preoptic area and the signals from elsewhere in the body are combined and integrated to control the heat producing and heat conserving reactions of the body. Now let's look at the temperature decreasing mechanisms. First one is vasodilation. This dilation, it is caused by the inhibition of the sympathetic centers in the posterior hypothalamus that can cause vasoconstriction. Second one is sweating, which we discussed already. Third one is decrease in heat production. Basically, the mechanisms that cause excess heat production, such as shivering and chemical thermogenesis, are strongly inhibited. Coming to temperature increasing mechanisms, first one would be skin vasoconstriction. It is caused by stimulation of the posterior hypothalamic sympathetic centers. Next one is piloerection. This is caused by the sympathetic stimulation, which causes the erector pili muscles attached to the hair follicles to contract, so which will bring the hairs to an upright stance and produces goosebumps. Goosebumps is a common name which we all know on the skin at the base of the hairs. And then increase in thermogenesis, which is heat production. It is increased by promoting shivering, sympathetic excitation of heat production, and thyroxine secretion. Now, what is this hypothalamic stimulation of shivering? Primary motor center for shivering is located in the dorsomedial portion of the posterior hypothalamus near the wall of the third ventricle. This area is normally inhibited by signals from anterior hypothalamic preoptic area, but it is activated when the body temperature falls, and it could be even a fraction of a degree below a critical temperature level, or cold signals from the skin and spinal cord. It then transmits signals which will cause shivering through bilateral tracts down the brain stem into the lateral columns of the spinal cord and finally to the anterior motor neurons. These signals are non-rhythmic, and they will increase the tone of the skeletal muscles throughout the body by facilitating the activity of the anterior motor neurons. When the tone rises above a certain level, shivering begins. So this reaction probably results from the feedback oscillation of the muscle spindle stretch reflex mechanism. So sympathetic chemical excitation of heat production. In an increase in either sympathetic stimulation or circulating norepinephrine and epinephrine in the blood can rapidly increase the rate of cellular metabolism. So this effect is what we call chemical thermogenesis or non-shivering thermogenesis. It results at least partially from the ability of norepinephrine and epinephrine to uncouple oxidative phosphorylation, which means that excess foodstuffs are oxidized and thereby release energy in the form of heat but do not cause adenosine triphosphate to be formed. Chemical thermogenesis occurring in an animal is almost directly proportional to the amount of brown fat in the animal's tissue. This type of fat contains a large number of special mitochondria where uncoupled oxidation occurs. Brown fat, what is it? It is richly supplied with sympathetic nerves that release norepinephrine, which stimulates tissue expression of mitochondrial uncoupling protein 1, UCP1, also called as thermogenin, and increases thermogenesis. In adult human beings who have almost no brown fat, it is rare for chemical thermogenesis to occur. But in newborns, they fight hypothermia by non-shivering thermogenesis because they do have brown fat in their interscapular space. So, what is the set point for temperature control? A critical body core temperature of about 37.1 degrees Celsius, which is 98.8 degree Fahrenheit. Drastic changes occur in the rates of both heat loss and heat production. This crucial temperature level is what we call the set point of the of the temperature control mechanism. That is, all the temperature control mechanisms continuously they attempt to bring the body temperature back to the set point level. So the feedback gain is a measure of the effectiveness of a control system. The feedback gain of the temperature control system is equal to the ratio of the change in environmental temperature to the change in body core temperature minus 1. The body temperature of humans changes about 1 degree Celsius for each 25 degrees Celsius to 30 degrees Celsius. That is change in environmental temperature. And therefore, the feedback gain of the total mechanism for body temperature control averages about 27, which is 28 by 1 minus 1 is equal to 27, which is an extremely high gain for a biological control system, which means temperature regulating system is one of the high gain biological control system. So what happens when our body gets acclimatized to the heat? Among the most important physiological changes that occur during this acclimatization process are an approximately twofold increase in the maximum rate of sweating, an increase in plasma volume, and diminished loss of salt in the sweat and urine to almost none. The last two effects results from increased secretion of aldosterone by the adrenal glands. Now, what do we know about fever? Many proteins, breakdown products of proteins, and certain other substances, especially lipopolysaccharide toxins released from bacterial cell membranes, can cause the set point of the hypothalamic thermostat to rise. So substances that cause this effect are what we call pyrogens. Pyrogens released from toxic bacteria or those released from degenerating body tissues cause fever during disease conditions. When bacteria or breakdown products of bacteria are present in the tissues or in the blood, they are phagocytized by the blood leukocytes. So by tissue macrophages and by large granular killer lymphocytes. All these cells digest the bacterial products and then release cytokines. One of the most important of these cytokines in causing fever is interleukin 1, also called as leukocyte pyrogen or endogenous pyrogen. IL-1 is released from macrophages into the body fluids and then upon reaching the hypothalamus almost immediately activates the process to produce fever. How fast is it? IL-1 causes fever by first inducing formation of one of the prostaglandins, mainly prostaglandin E2 or a similar substance which acts in the hypothalamus to elicit the fever reaction. So when prostaglandin formation is blocked by drugs, the fever is either completely abrogated or at least reduced. Another condition that frequently causes this prolonged high temperature is compression of the hypothalamus by a brain tumor. Let's see what we know about frostbite. So, when the body is exposed to extremely low temperatures, the surface areas can freeze, especially this occurs in the lobes of the ears and in the digits of the hand and feet. So, if the freeze is enough to cause extensive formation of ice crystals in the cells, permanent damage usually occurs, such as permanent circulatory impairment and local tissue damage. Gangrene often follows, and the frostbitten areas must be removed surgically. So that's it, and thank you for listening. And if you found this video helpful, please like, share, and subscribe.